and welcome to Seeing Jesus with Paul Miller. I'm Liz Boberil, and I'm here with Paul and John, who's our director for Asia Pacific. The ministry behind this podcast, seeJesus, creates discipleship tools and trains people in how to use them. We often say many organizations do important work helping the church be the hands and feet of Jesus, but seeJesus works on the imagination and the heart. We want to help the church rediscover the beauty of Jesus and catch a vision to live as he lived. So in this new series, our Wonder series, we are focusing on just that as we slow down to notice how Jesus lived as a human and what this means for us. So far, we have slowly walked through three specific scenes: Jesus with Mary Magdalene at the resurrection, Jesus before Pilate, and Jesus as he washes the disciples' feet at the Last Supper. And in our last episode, we began talking through the range of ways that Jesus loves as we see it displayed in these stories. And that's where we're going to pick up today. Paul, why don't I pass it over to you and you can recap what we covered and where we're going.
Thanks, Liz. Let me just give an overview of these four ways that Jesus has of loving. So the first one that we talked about last week is selfless openness, which if there is a way of Jesus loving in our modern world that the world is allergic to, it's probably selfless openness. Like the door being open in your house to, it's a hard thing to do, to be open to people's needs, to listen to them.
We can be open to the people we like, Paul.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's the
that
people.
First word that's hard, the selfless part.
Yeah. And then so what we do is we pair these attributes. The opposite of that, which one is we're going to talk about, is good walls. So it's the exact opposite of it. And then we'll go on. I'll just give you a quick preview. Then we're going to look at gentle intrusion, which is the opposite of selfless openness in a different kind of way, where you're intruding into people's lives. In selfless openness, you're letting them intrude, and now you're moving into their lives. So we call that gentle intrusion. And then the last way is self-control, where you're even saying no to yourself. So we'll go over this enough that you'll get a feel for it.
And there's going to be, there's a visual that we'll be putting on the page for this podcast series. That's seeJesus.net/wonder. So you can see all this stuff wrapped up in one chart, made with love for you by Paul Miller.
Right. Now, I'm a little nervous about saying good walls because our world is fairly enthusiastic about good walls, relatively speaking, like boundaries. I need to have boundaries in this relationship. I think I hear that, I don't know, once a month for sure. And maybe you do, but it's a way of doing life often for people that protects the self, and it keeps them from moving into other people's lives. But that's the negative. What it isn't. That's not what we're saying. But just some examples of Jesus' good walls. We saw him do that with Pilate. It's pretty subtle, but Pilate is mocking Jesus and saying, "Oh, so you're a king." Jesus puts up a pretty gentle good wall and says, "You say that I'm a king." Pilate just mocked Jesus, say, it's ridiculous you even think you're a king. Look at you. And then Jesus takes that and makes it a pause, like he puts it's a very subtle good wall that he does. And this is kind of subtle too, but with Mary Magdalene at the end of that wondrous scene in the garden, Jesus says, "Stop clinging to me. Go to your brothers and tell them of the resurrection." Like with Peter too, and Peter says, "No, you can't wash me." And Jesus says, "If I don't wash you, you have no share of me." So just other thoughts, John and Liz, that come to your mind as you think about that?
Well, the common term often used, broadly speaking, is boundaries, right?
Right.
We're setting up boundaries. And as you said, there's a heavy lean towards setting up boundaries and walls. And so in this kind of moment in our culture, I think there's a tendency to set up walls or boundaries and make that absolute and kind of the all-encompassing lens for a lot of things. So we need to be careful. There is wisdom in that. But I think what I find interesting specifically with Jesus, in a lot of the cases, maybe not every case, where he does set up a wall or kind of a boundary, oftentimes it's because people want him to do something that would actually, in the world's eyes, be way more glorious or easy. And oftentimes he'll kind of put up a boundary in a way that, because he's still on mission, and actually it's a mission that's actually much harder and more painful. So the boundaries he sets up actually keep him on track to what not the world wants, not even what his friends want, but what his Father wants.
Yeah. That's a really good way to say it, John. Most people tend to assume that becoming like Jesus is not having walls. I mean, Jesus himself says, "Come to me, all ye that are, labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." So that selfless openness is such a defining characteristic of Jesus that it's kind of surprising, but also refreshing to see that he says no to people. Where the guy says, make my brother divide the inheritance. And then Jesus says, "Who made me judge over you?" It's very Jesus, the Philadelphian. So it's and John, I think you're right. That comes out of Jesus' mission, but it's a pretty significant part of his life. There's a lot of scenes like the rich young ruler, which Jesus doesn't go chasing after him, and that could be more an example of self-control. But he's essentially putting up a wall for the rich young ruler, who could be John Mark himself. He puts up a very high wall for him to go through. Even the parable of the Good Samaritan, when he makes the Samaritan the hero of the parable, that's a really strong wall that he's putting up in front of this teacher of the law, because he's inviting him to open up his heart to this person. The hero of the play, he's making it difficult for this person to move towards the story that Jesus is telling. That's a little complicated, that part, but it's so common. Like, here's another story, like when Jesus goes north to Lebanon, to Syria, Phoenicia, as it's called in most translations, when that woman has a demon possessed son, I think it is, and Jesus puts up a wall. And it's actually a wall meant for her to punch through. Like, he's just so creative with people. And I mean, that kind of opens up another door. Let me pause here, but to see what you guys are thinking.
I mean, interesting. It seems like the examples that you just shared are in many ways different than what I would commonly think about boundaries. So boundaries are set up not necessarily to encourage people's faith or to give them an opportunity or to keep me on track with my mission. The boundaries that I typically want to set up is to protect me.
Yes.
To protect me from getting hurt.
Right.
And there's time and place and wisdom in that, for sure. In extreme situations, or one is going to be harmed, of course, we need to literally set up walls at times. But relationally, this can be misused in many ways as just kind of a blanket. I'm going to protect and insulate myself from the world and anything that is potentially hurtful, harmful, emotionally, or is going to cost me something. Time, resources. And so I'm trying not to get on a soapbox, but I'm just trying to
go, John, preach it.
Well, yeah, I mean, part of it might just be the era in which I was raised and educated, being a psychology major in undergraduate. That was a lot of the talk. And I think it became a primary, if not predominant lens at times in circles that I was operating in, whether it be in education or even in church. And so in the long run, even whatever temporary sacrifices or hurts that were protected, that allowed the person to be protected from, in the long run, isolated them in many ways. And it actually made things worse at times.
I would say just in general, it always makes things worse. Especially with the tendency now among parents, pretty strong tendency to protect their children, as opposed to building faith in their child, because faith builds under stress. And when you're obviously I'm not talking about not the basics of, protecting your child and a younger child in traffic and that kind of thing, but a general of not letting your child fail. I was talking to a parent recently who they wanted to help their child with their college essay because the child was resistant. And I told them, I would think that's great. Let him fail. Let him write a terrible essay and not get in. Like living in the real world. So it just keeps so we have a lot of people now that have not matured, and I know I'm sounding like I'm 70 here, but it's just true. Where you really hurt someone, and Jesus is not just, it's not for the protection of himself.
I'm thinking about later on in the end of one of the epistles where Paul talks about bear one another's burdens, but each of you have to carry your own load. There's sort of a bit of discernment involved in like going with selfless openness can lead to very amoeba-shaped life, right? And the walls are sort of rightly discerning who needs to bear this burden and whether it's going to help or hinder. Sometimes the walls help with the bearing of the burden in the right place.
Right. Good. Yeah. Good. Yeah. It's very true. The next one, gentle intrusion. Remember, we said it was the opposite of selfless openness, because in selfless openness, you're letting others intrude into your life. Now, with gentle intrusion, you're intruding into other people's lives. And I would say, in general, I see this one fading a lot. People are so fearful of triggering someone. They're so fearful for damage that what keeps them from loving is their risk assessment that they're doing. And it's almost like there's this constant risk assessment going in relationships, with the result that people's lives are narrowing. There's this narrowing around the self. Let me just pause there. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Can we talk about the examples of Jesus doing it, just to kind of make it concrete for people? Like, what are we talking about?
It's kind of Jesus' go-to. I mean, we'll talk about this later on, but it's just like his go-to thing. I mean, he's like, after his resurrection, walking down the road to Emmaus. Hey, what are you guys talking about as you walk? I mean, it's this. Zacchaeus is, of course, a classic. Hey, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house today.
Well, and in the stories we've talked about, right? He steps into Mary's grieving in the garden. It's a gentle intrusion in the midst of this garden as she's grieving. And with Pilate, Jesus just enters that whole dialogue with more energy than the person in custody is supposed to have. And then with the disciples, he's crossing over these boundaries as he picks up the thing the slave is supposed to do. He's definitely like intruding in the way that he's crossing into that space.
Yeah, and I'm getting a little ahead of us because we'll be talking about this later on. But just as a theme, in Luke 7, with the woman who's likely a prostitute, there are hints in the text, and she's weeping at his feet and pouring oil. Like, she is intruding into his life, and I know it's selfless openness on him, but it's just like, he loves people doing to him what he does to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like he just like it. He's constantly breaking into barriers and breaking over barriers. It's just such a. The whole incarnation is one big intrusion.
It's a blessed intrusion. But
Yeah, and he already did the risk assessment in heaven. He's all in, and it's Warfield's little phrase from his sermon, which is just wonderful. It's called Imitating the Incarnation. You can, I'm sure if you just Google B.B. Warfield Imitating the Incarnation, you can pick up the sermon, but it's towards the end of the sermon. It's not that long. Warfield says, it's not that you live like to love like Christ, to love in the example of the incarnation is you don't live one life, but you live 1,000 lives. And it's such a, when I read that the first time, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago, I was just absolutely captivated. It's just a vision of the Christian life that's so much fun. You're involved. You're busy, you're moving into people's lives. And obviously there are times in wisdom where you have to wait and pray, but our default is distance. And it's just such a beautiful world to not care about whether you're going to offend someone, to be a messenger at just a little bit of a segue here. Like, if you're in here, it kind of reverses where you located. If you're in Christ, then when you're intruding into people's lives, you're inviting them into the larger world of Jesus. And as opposed to being worried about what they're in. I said this recently to a couple that are friends of mine when they were going overseas to a different culture. And I said, when you're in that city, you're going to want to understand the people and be sensitive to their world, but don't let that become the big thing. You're drawing them into the world of Christ. That's what that city is in Jesus. You're in Jesus. You're intruding into their world to bring them into Christ. And so many missionaries get so frozen by the cross-cultural realities and are afraid of offending, and they miss all the opportunities sit in front of it.
Well, it makes me think about, like we talk sometimes about having our loves rightly ordered. It's also having our fears rightly ordered, right?
Yeah,
like you can fear, you can over fear upsetting sort of a somewhat fragile peace that's worked out among people, or, the fragile piece of trying to work cross-culturally. But you have a deeper peace in Christ that is, and depending on the scenario, that person may as well. So living in light of that is important.
When I picture this embodied, I don't know why. This is maybe just my own life, and maybe it's a caricature, but it's happened often in my life that there have been a lot of older, elderly women, oftentimes in the church, who have just intruded into my life, spoken words that are not always easy to speak. And it's been one of the most refreshing things for me and what I've needed. Like I noticed there's some of the qualities is they're deeply rooted in Jesus, and in that there's almost a healthy lack of self-awareness, because they are so in Jesus and they are so for me and wanting to love me, that they're not afraid to ask hard questions. They're not also afraid to call a spade a spade. A classic example of this is when I was a church planter, there was an elderly woman who for many Sundays would tell me, you really look stressed. I'm a professional deep tissue, muscle tissue therapist, and I can help you. And so she kept telling me this Sunday after Sunday, and I kept looking at her. She's elderly, and I'm thinking, yeah, right. Well, how can you help me? And so I finally, after one Sunday, I said, okay, sure. So, I go, and she says, she works on me and for about an hour, and the pain was so excruciating that when I went into the bathroom to wash up, I had little red dots on my cheek because I had popped blood vessels because I had been pushing my face so deep into the donut, trying not to scream, that I had popped blood vessels in my cheeks. And so afterwards, I was getting ready to leave, and she said, "Pastor, you're in horrible shape." and she did, and she said, "I can help you. It's going to take 10 weeks straight minimum." And as I was so kind of soft and malleable and just beaten down, I'm just nodding my head silently. And then as I walked out the door, as I did, I didn't even turn around. She said, "And next time, I won't take it easy on you." And
that's awesome.
And that woman not only offered her skills to really literally loosen up all of the tension in my back and my neck, but she was just not afraid to talk and be real. And I was delighted to talk with her. Over time, she was an encourager, but she was also willing to challenge some things in me. And so she was just delightful.
Yeah, that's really great. I love that. We just had my mom's funeral a week ago, and she was 101. And Mom was famous for those, just an older woman, but since she was my mom, she did it when I was young, that kind of intrusion where one of the grandkids, so she's got 24 grandkids and 61 great grandkids. So one of the grandkids at the funeral, they had a time when the grandkids got up on an open mic and said that her questions to me were uncomfortable. Like, are you reading the Bible? What's God doing in your heart? Questions that are not cool, and for a young man to hear, and yet God used those, and she got away with it. And I just, there's a whole thing that a couple things are dying out because this weakness of this gentle intrusion, because we're so hypersensitive. As my dad said 50 years ago, it's like people are going around without any skin on anymore. And that was 50 years ago. Like they hypersensitive, easily triggered. My dad was the first person to comment on it. He was a very astute observer of people, and just as a pastor, he was just constantly in people's lives. But so witnessing is dying out, and that just the beauty of what John shared there is just dying out, where we're actually doing another person good. And the result of this dying out is the church is not growing as much because there's not as many people witnessing. And by witness, I mean the whole movement of your life into another person's life, befriending them, and and then the wisdom is dying down, is not being passed as much to the next generation, because there's not a culture of receiving wisdom and accepting it and learning from it.
Yep. I think it's also, because Paul, you're pointing at it, it affects evangelism, and it also affects sanctification, and that like willingness. I was kind of smiling because I was like, maybe it's only it's the combo of the words gentle and intrusion that make the difference, because there's some personality types that are just bound to intrude all the time, but they don't care. They don't care if you listen or not. They're not necessarily trying. I mean, maybe they're trying to do good, but they're like not great at doing good. So there's always going to be a segment that still intrude, but the gentle aspect of it that helps it to be heard. I was talking with a friend the other day who I had a conversation with some time ago, and just shared something in my own life where at a point where I was like, I need to relinquish this. And just that word, I didn't like the word relinquish, because it really felt like that's a total letting go. And I didn't really want to totally let go. But I had shared that story with her in a similar vein. And she, some years later, was still said, I remember that conversation and that word you used, right? But I felt the hardness of that word I was sharing with her too, because I was like, I didn't like this word. I'm sure she doesn't like this word. It's just but that's I do think it affects both the evangelism and our ability to go deeper in Jesus together when we don't do gentle intrusion.
I mean, there's so many other things that we could say about gentle intrusion, but why don't we go on to this fourth area? Now, remember, this is the opposite of gentle intrusion, and it's self-control, where you're saying no to yourself. In gentle intrusion, you're saying, as it were, yes to yourself, like you're giving your permission yourself to move into other people's life. And this way, self-control is you're saying no. And some of that, there's some similarity between saying no to yourself and saying no to others, what we said, good walls. But you see that self-control really leaps out of our texts, like with Mary Magdalene, with the greatest news there ever in humanity. And Jesus says no to the very human desire to just shout it from the rooftops.
Go tell it on the mountain.
Yeah, right.
He doesn't do that.
With Pilate, it's self-control to not retaliate verbally, to not to absorb Pilate's mocking. And so it's just saying no to himself. I mean, the self-control he exhibits with not going to Lazarus's funeral right away. It's just all over. The two no's, which are good walls to others and no to yourself, though, are in the service of the two primary ways of loving, of gentle intrusion and selfless openness. Those are the Jesus' primary moves, and the negatives are balance and shape those primary moves. Does that make sense? It's kind of a big thought.
So I don't want to add confusion in, but have we talked about the Y chart somewhere in our podcast?
Not yet, John.
No,
go ahead.
It's coming up in the future.
Well,
it's actually our next conversation.
I mean,
go ahead, John.
And steal your thunder,
right?
I mean, I'm just thinking, the terms we've used in past podcasts about the person of Jesus is you have these two basic sides of love, being compassion and honesty, or compassion, forbearance, forgiveness, kind of the softer side of love, and then you have honesty and truth side of love. And so when you're saying yes, in many ways, and selfless openness is a form of compassion, of forbearing, of being patient. And then gentle intrusion is a form of bringing honesty or kind of saying, having harder conversations. And so I can see how those two are kind of operating both in the biblical stories with Jesus, but also in daily life. But the wisdom of each of those is what you're talking about in terms of if we just are completely only selfless, open, and there's that's absolute, then, someone who's in a dire situation, who's being abused, might say, well, I just got to be selfless, open to everybody, including my abuser. And so there's wisdom on the saying no side of, no, there are times where you set up good walls. And then the same thing with a gentle intrusion. It's like if you just think, oh, well, I'm supposed to speak into everybody's life, whether they want to hear it or not, then, we just become quite annoying and no one wants to talk to us. And so there is this not a flip side, but this balance of the self-control of at times having the wisdom to say no to myself and keep my mouth shut. And that was the beauty of that older woman that I was speaking about earlier, the elderly woman who was, at times literally speaking into my life and also literally pressing the point of her elbow into my back. But at other times, she really was a great listener. She really was one who could probably boast quite a bit about the life she had led with the Lord. And the only way I discovered some of those things was I was asking her questions, and in her own self-control, she was being humble. And as I drew out her life story, I was amazed about the way she had lived her life.
Yeah, in the combo of this range, right? So what we're looking at, it's really, I don't know if we've said yet, this is kind of a grid, the way that we're talking about it and understanding it. Hence there's two different ways of being opposite across the 4 categories we've reviewed. But it always makes me think of, that's why we talk way back when we first started this podcast, we talked about Jesus and these ninja moves of love. I do still think that's what I think about. Just, I'm like not the world's best exerciser at all, but I just think about the kind of incredible core strength it takes to pivot through these different kinds of motion, because they're opposite means you have to have a strong middle to kind of hold it and swing from one to the other. So that's where I feel like I see so much of the strength at Jesus's core that can do this whole range.
Right. The word, one of the words that we've used is his agility. A great athlete can move between different moves. That's why I love watching the Olympics or it's just amazing to see. I particularly enjoy the Winter Olympics, and I just, like, how does he hold that turn or she hold that turn? It's just,
Paul, that's the skiers you're admiring, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
But you have to, the emphasis is me being unable to even come close to holding that turn,
right.
And that kind of relate, one is his ability to move between different kinds of love in one conversation. Like just if you just take Pilate, it begins with a gentle intrusion in that conversation. He puts up a good wall to Pilate's mocking. He goes back to a gentle intrusion, and the whole while he's absorbing Pilate's mocking with selfless openness. Like he's operating in all these worlds at the same time. And what's so great, it raises the bar for us as to what love is. And the New Testament does nothing but raise the bar for love. And it just, I think it just, like Paul, we say, it's not, I've not obtained this, but with all my energy, he says this in Philippians 3. This is a really bad paraphrase. I'm reaching for the goal of the upward call of God. And his call, one of his primary calls, is for me to look like Christ. Let me just read this from Warfield. Part of the beauty of the way he loves is how little he's focused on himself. Jesus did not cultivate self, even his divine self. He took no account of self. He was not led into the recesses of his own soul to brood morbidly over his own needs. He was led by his love for others into the world to forget himself and the needs of others, to sacrifice self once for all on the altar of sympathy. And then at the same time, there's this revelation of Christ. So it's not like he's so focused on the other, he disappears. He appears. His beauty comes out of that. And just one other, just a couple more insights. One of the most striking things about the Gospels that is the wide range of people that are in them. And it comes from the wide range of his love. And it makes the Gospels kind of confusing, you know, because you just it's like Jesus doesn't know what he's doing. He's just going to kind of keep bumping into random people. But what if our lives, had that same awareness that whoever God is bringing in our path is someone to both love and to draw into Christ. And that our love is the grease for drawing them into Christ. And so that we are, and it would give our lives that wide sense. And this is a secular scholar. Do you want to read this? This is one of my favorite books. Mimesis is a classic on Western civilization. He was a Jewish German scholar, Erich Auerbach, and he wrote this book during World War II when he had fled Berlin. And here's his comment about the Gospels.
The random fisherman or publican or rich youth, the random Samaritan or adulteress, come from their random everyday circumstances to be confronted with the personality of Jesus. A scene like Peter's denial does not exist in the literature of antiquity. I do not believe there is a single passage in an antique historian where direct discourse is employed in this fashion in a brief, direct dialogue.
It's just this hodgepodge of people. And scholars can't get their mind around, okay, so like Romans, that's sort of their ideal. You know what I mean? Because it's all logical. But what if what we're looking at is the logic of love? And because his range is so big, because he operates in all these four ways of loving, he does not have a personality like we do. Each of us adjusts our ways of loving so we begin kind of with a narrow band of loving. Sometimes as we get older, that range broadens. Sometimes it narrows too. As you get beat up by life, you stop doing gentle intrusion, you know, or you lose self-control, you know, and it's no Christian maturity can go in reverse too. But just the summary is he does not have a personality like we do because Jesus participates in all the flavors. I'm switching my metaphors there. I'm not sure I had a metaphor to start with. Like you can't say this is just Italian or this is, you know, because it's like he has all these ways of loving because the immensity of his soul is so big that there's no one like him. There's just, and yet it is the thing we are called to become.
Right. Which is like where we're to see him and to see this range of love is to see an Olympian par excellence. And then to think that that's what we're supposed to go and love like is daunting, but wonderful and kind of is exciting in that, oh, that's this thing we're to do too.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah. John, did you have a thought? You look very meditative.
Oh, I was just thinking the first time I ever taught lesson 43 or 44, the Person of Jesus study, when they talk about that symphony of love, where you see all of this on display in a very tight narrative and moment in Jesus's life as he heads from the garden all the way to the cross. I remember as I was teaching it, I just broke down in tears, and it just dumbfounded me later. I was like, why did I do that? Because it wasn't like the lesson caught me off guard. I prepared for the lesson. And I realized I had prepared the lesson in terms of all of the steps and the content and all of those things. But what captured me in the middle of that lesson was the beauty of Jesus. And I was enthralled and moved by the beauty of his love. It was like seeing a work of art come alive right in front of my eyes for the very first time. And I was enthralled, and it just moved me to tears.
Amen. All right. Well, we will return back to this wonder of Jesus with our next episode in a couple of weeks. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, John, Paul. We'll be back again soon.